Welcome to the Equipped Disciple channel. My name is Rick McClatchy. I will be your host. We are here to be and to make disciples of Jesus, and we do that through daily devos, through Sunday sermons, and through other discipleship resources. We are here to equip you to be an equipped disciple. All right, welcome into another day of your daily devos. I'm Pastor Rick, and we are jumping into Genesis chapter 16, and we're just gonna jump right in. If you could like and comment and subscribe, that would be so cool. And maybe grab a link and share it with a friend or two. Today's is a good one. When your timing doesn't match God's timing, hashtag relatable. How many of you have ever experienced a time where you expected God to move in a particular time frame and it just didn't happen according to that time frame? So here we go. We're going to jump in to verse 1. And verse 1 says, Abram's wife Sarai had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. You're like, well, why does that matter? Well, you'll see here in just a minute. So Sarai said to Abraham, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family. And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan for 10 years. So it gives you just a little bit of time frame for like Abram was showing up in Canaan about the time the promise came to him. And so you get a context that he's been waiting on, like both of them have been waiting on this promise for an heir since God spoke for about 10 years. So just to put it into context of how long they've been waiting. So there's some things to observe here, but not a lot of criticism that I want to lodge because like, from a human perspective, well, I get it. You know, it's easy for me to say, looking back on it now, knowing the end of the story, like how silly, like how could you be so silly and not just trust God? But so 10 years already. So just keep that in mind. And so Sarai looked at the natural circumstances alone. So we need to always process our current circumstances in light of the promises of God. So if God said you're going to have an heir, then maybe, and it's not adding up the way you expect it to, maybe go to him and ask him and say, God, did I misunderstand you? Like, what's up? Like, what's happening here? And so I think the first thing is just like, Sarai, like, hey, when things aren't going the way that you expected them to go, when things have taken longer than you expected them to take, don't just solve the problem with your own, conniving, your own solutions, whatever, your problem solving skills that you're so noted for, whatever. Like, go to the Lord, cry out to the Lord, ask him, say, what is going on? Because I think that God would be pretty understanding if you were getting a little tired on the waiting side after 10 years. I think if you went to the Lord and you said, God, what's going on? Like, I've been waiting for 10 years and you said this and I don't see the proof of it. So what's happening? Unfortunately, we'll come back to that verse in a second. How she interpreted her circumstances affected how she was viewing God. What do you mean by that? Well, when you look at Sarai said to Abraham, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, she didn't say like, since I haven't been able to conceive or whatever. Like, she's assigning 100% responsibility of this situation to God, actively kind of opposing it. Then go to him and ask him what's happening. Like, if you believe that he's prevented you, then say, God, why are you preventing me? What's happening? Like, so she's allowing the circumstances to dictate how she views God, but she's not going to God to allow him the opportunity to defend his word. And I think that the word of God is true. And so if it's not making sense to us, we need to humble ourselves and say, Lord, I don't get it. I don't understand. It seems like you promised me one thing, but it's not coming to pass. And that's where Isaiah 55:8 and 9 comes into play. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways. This is the Lord's declaration. That, like, his thoughts and my thoughts do not line up. They are not equal. My ways are not his ways. For as heaven is higher than earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So actually, his plans are better. Like, you can see actually throughout all of Scripture how God works through barren wombs, like women that could not have babies. And yet they would have a baby. Because God wanted moments where the only justifiable solution or like conclusion you could come to is that God did it. Because he operated in situations where there was no other way for it to come to pass. And so I think, he's waiting until Abram and Sarai both surrender to the fact that their physical bodies are dead. Like, that's where Hebrews talks about, like, Abram, like, he looked at his body as though it was dead. So for him to have a son was like life coming out of death. And it was just significant of the amazing power of God. And God wanted to make sure that there was no confusion about Isaac and his origin story, if you will, that Isaac was the son of promise and that he was an answer to God's plan. Like, he was the one, like, that's where it was coming from. So verse 4, he slept with Hagar and she became pregnant. And when she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May the Lord judge between you and me. So apparently Hagar was thinking she was something, but also, I mean, Hagar also probably felt a little awkward, like, well, you've been wanting to be pregnant for a long, long time, and now I'm pregnant. And so Sarai's having to deal with the fact that apparently this barrenness is associated with her, and it's not an Abram problem. And so I think that there's probably a lot of natural struggle going on there mentally and emotionally. So obviously this is causing a whole bunch of contempt and, challenge between Sarai and Hagar. Yeah. And then Abram replied to Sarai, here, your slave is in your power. Do whatever you want with her. Then Sarai mistreated her so much that Hagar ran away. So natural consequences of our own plans often bring pain and frustration. Ooh, that'll preach, unfortunately. I could preach some personal stories about, natural consequences of my own plans, bringing pain and frustration in my life. I'm familiar, I know what that's like. And so, it's just a reality. And so unfortunately this resulted in Hagar getting treated really, really badly, by Sarai. And, so she ran away, right? So she runs away into the wilderness. I love verse 7. It says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I think that's such a great question for us to ask ourselves all the time. Like, hey, where have I come from and where am I going? Have I gotten off track? Have I forgotten where I came from? Do I know where I'm going? Like, that we keep all of that in play constantly, because it just helps really keep our perspective adjusted and readjusted over time. So she replied, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. So she actually had no destination. All she was doing was running away from something. And the angel of the Lord said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her authority. So that's a rough challenge from the Lord right there. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they will be too many to count. So she's going to partake of this Abrahamic blessing, simply because the line coming through her is also coming from Abram. And the angel of the Lord found her. Like, I love that verse. that he is a God who seeks us out, even when we're running, even when we're struggling, even when we're like trying to figure stuff out on our own. He comes and finds us. Like the angel of the Lord found her. And the angel of the Lord said to her, "You've conceived and will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. This man will be like a wild donkey. His land will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him." It's kind of this prophetic declaration of what his life is going to look like, and he will settle near all his relatives. So she named the Lord who spoke to her. El Roi, for she said, "In this place have I actually seen the one who sees me?" And so a lot of times when it says the angel of the Lord, it's referring actually to another, like a Christophany, basically a pre-incarnation appearance of Jesus. And because the angel of the Lord is frequently receives worship in those kinds of situations, people bow down. And if it's an actual angel, the angel will always refuse the worship because angels know their place. And so, but El Roi, the God who sees. What an incredible name. What an incredible revelation of who God is. And so when you get into challenging situations, a lot of times the thing that we forget is that God sees you. Like God knows where you are. He knows what you're facing. He knows what you're going through. And so go to him and process whatever you're dealing with in his presence, because he sees you. He knows you. He loves you. He cares for you. Like, don't forget those things. Because when we forget those things and all we can think is the Lord is preventing me from, then we make terrible decisions, because we make our decisions apart from God rather than in partnership with God. So El Roi, the God who sees me. That is why the well is called Bir Lahai Roi. It is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. So basically he heard the story because he's the one that named the baby. So she told him the story. This is what happened. I went out, I ran away, angel of the Lord, and then told me to name Ishmael. So Abram heard the story, believed the story, and then named him Ishmael to kind of fulfill all that stuff. And then Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. So he'd been waiting for 10 years. He still got another 14 to wait. And then you add in the 9 months of being, pregnant, waiting for the baby, waiting for Ishmael to show up. So really we're talking in the 25-year kind of time frame from when Abram got the first word declaration of you're going to have offspring to when Isaac was actually born. So waiting on God is never easy, but it is always right. Waiting on God is never easy, but it is always right, even to the tune of 25 years. Because God's not limited by time, folks. So even though you can feel like, oh my gosh, we're running out of time, like this needed to happen yesterday or last year, and it still hasn't come to pass, it still hasn't happened. You can think God's left me. He's forgotten. He's, he let go of the wheel, like Jesus, take the wheel, and then he lets go. So waiting on God is never easy, but it is always right. With that, God bless you today. Have a great day. I will talk to you tomorrow.